Story of Pete's Trailer Park. Well, it all started back around 1967, I think. I think it was 1967. Anyway, I think I was about 5 years old, and I was in this little school in a place called Milford, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I was just starting school, and it was turning winter time. It was like late fall. It's that time of year when you get cold nights, and the around somewhere it must have been around Halloween time or whatever. But you get these cold nights, and frost comes down, and there's muddy ice puddles, everywhere because it rains a lot in New England area. And so what happens is a cold, snapping cold about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning freezes a layer of ice over top of the ice puddles and everything. And one of the things I remember about that school is I remember I was a weak, sickly kid, and there was a lot of other big kids, and they used to get out in the playground. And I have a memory of about three of those boys pushing me down into one of those cold ice puddles, and they had me laying flat first, face first, like with my face out over the hard ice. And they were stepping on my fingers and stomping on my fingers and breaking the ice underneath my fingers with their feet. I remember that, and I mean, memories like that stick out in your mind because they're things that you can't forget, But, kids are awful cruel. This morning I was watching a video, and it was of this dog on YouTube, and they had some kids, I guess it was some other country. It wasn't America, but it was a foreign country. I think it was India, they said, or some country like that. Uh, they had taken and put glue all over this poor little dog, industrial glue, you know. And they had the video of them cleaning the dog up, and they were shaving all of his fur off. And the poor little thing, when they first got him, he couldn't even move. He was like rigid and hard because all the glue had set all over him. And he was just a puppy. He was only like maybe 4 months old, And it showed him trying to walk, and his legs were sprayed out, and his fur was all matted down with this glue, and his head was all covered with the glue, and his he could only open one eye, and he was all glued up, with this hard industrial glue. And I guess the vets got him, and they had an awful time saving his life, but they took a pair of shears, and they cut his fur off, and they had to cut it real close. In some places, they found that his skin was all like burned from the glue and everything. But kids are terrible cruel. Can you imagine doing that to a poor little puppy, But they were able to save him, and it was a heartwarming video to watch the end of it. I mean, he grew up to be a lovely dog, and his fur all grew back out again. He was really friendly, lovely dog. But it just surprises me sometimes when you see how cruel boys and even girls can be, at an early age. It kind of starts to make you think about humanity itself. Where are we going with humanity, and what kind of condition are we in if our children can be that cruel? It's terrible. Anyway, I suppose that's why we're a species that wages war with one another. But anyway, getting back to the story, I remember them. They pushed me down into the ice, and they were stomping on my fingers. Not only that, half of these kids, they had flus and stuff, and they were coughing, and mucus was coming out of them and everything else, and I caught it. I caught everything that was going that winter, from school. I got mumps, I got scarlet fever, I got the chicken pox, I got whooping cough, I got about maybe 5 or 6, and including the bad flus, So by the time we got into late winter, my dad and my mother were terrible worried about me, They took me into the doctor. And the doctor, I was a skinny, sickly kid. My skin was all pale, pasty white. I was very thin and very weak from all these flus and stuff. And I think my father was really worried about me, very concerned, He was working building the house. He was finishing the house off that he'd built, and he was going around and he was scavenging whatever materials he could find, used building materials to finish the house off. He was using used shingles, and they had holes in them, and he would put the new nails in where the old holes were on the shingles, and he was up on the roof finishing off the roof, the last little bits of the roof, you know. So my grandfather, a while earlier, had moved down to Florida. He got himself what's called a green card, which you have to apply for, which is an immigration card to the United States. And he had moved down to Florida, and he had opened up a television repair business. You know, back in those days, television repair was a big thing because TVs were extremely expensive, and people didn't throw away their old TVs. What they actually did was they sent them out for repair. My grandfather was good at this. He had his own little television repair business, and he was already living in a nice little trailer park down in Florida, and it was lovely and sunny, and he was writing and telling my dad how lovely it was, and sometimes phoning my dad, you know. And so my dad was getting fed up with Nova Scotia, you know, with its cold, wet, damp, rain, ice, snow environment, you know. And so one day, I guess my grandfather called him up and told him what a great time he was having, sent him a picture or whatever, and how sunny it was and warm and everything. So later that afternoon, plus my dad was worried about me, you know, because I was sick, constantly sick. So my dad was up on the roof, and he was nailing shingles, you know. And the last few shingles up on the roof, I guess the last ones to finish and complete his roof, these old used shingles, you know, and he's putting a nail in the shingle, and it was all icy, and it was pelleting down ice pellets on top of him while he was doing the job, you know. And the temperature was maybe 3 or 4 degrees below freezing, and he was up there, and he whacked his thumb. He got mad, threw the hammer, threw the shingle, and he said, "That's it. That's it. I'm done with," and he cursed a little bit. And my dad used to curse. I'll tell you, it was funny. He never said the F word, but he used to use the B word a lot, and he'd just go crazy with cursing for about 2 or 3 minutes, but it wasn't anything real serious, you know. It was like moderate cursing. He didn't go to the extreme cursing. It was always moderate cursing, but lots of it, you know what I mean? So he was up there, and he was doing the moderate cursing, like, you know, the B word and SOB and all of this kind of stuff, you know, and dams and many dams and more dams. And his thumb was throbbing, you know. I think he even took a bit of skin off of it, hitting it, and he said, "That's it. I'm going to Florida." He says, "I'm out of here. That's it." He's come down off of the roof, and he told my mother, he says, "I'm out of here." So first thing he figured he had to do was apply for a green card. So he applied for a green card, and he waited for weeks and weeks and weeks, and nothing happened, you know. So I believe he told me that what happened was he called his member of parliament at the time. And the member of parliament got his green card pushed straight through somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, but he said it came in a week or 2 weeks after I called. He said after I called the member of parliament, talked to him about it. So he got his green card. So I remember him he put his house up for sale, packed up the old car, and we had an old Chevy, I believe it was, you know, like a 1962 or something like that, an old Impala or something like that. I think it was an old Impala. Packed it all up with his gear and kit bag and everything else, my mother and me, and packed us inside the car. And I was terribly sick at that point, you know. I mean, I had everything going, and I was a really weak, scrawny kid. You know, one of these kids is so sickly, you wonder if they're even going to survive. My bowels weren't even working anymore. My mother was terribly concerned about me. I was just in a constant state of constipation, you know. And I wouldn't go to the bathroom for like a week. You know, my bowels weren't working because I was so sick. So it packed me inside the car, and I'll always have the memory, you know, leaving Nova Scotia. It was gray. Everything was gray, and it was white, gray and white. White snow everywhere, heaped up around the telephone poles. The snow must have been 10 feet deep. and just gray trees and a gray sky and a gray road driving out. I remember looking out the window and all I could see is gray, gray, gray as far as the eye could see. It was like a black and white world. I mean, okay, the car had color, I think it was blue, but anyway, everything else was gray, black and white. So as we were driving, heading south, we drove down, I think it was I-95, headed all the way down. Once we got down to about Georgia, the temperature started to get real nice and warm. And my grandfather, he told my dad, come right down to the trailer park in South Florida, in a little place called Hollywood, right next to Miami, not far from Miami. I think it's just to the north of Miami. It's a little city called Hollywood. Back in those days, it was just like a little strip town. There wasn't much to Hollywood, Florida. It was this tiny little town, They had a little grocery store, a little trailer park, and they had a few other things, and they had a school not far by and stuff. So my dad drove in to my grandfather's place. There's this little trailer park called Pete's Trailer Park. And I'm going to tell you what. I remember driving in there with the car, and everything was totally different than it was up in Canada, up in Nova Scotia. It wasn't gray. Everything was vibrant colors. If you ever watched the movie The Wizard of Oz, in the first part of the movie when she's in Kansas and everything is gray and everything is black and white, in the first part of the movie. But then she goes to Oz, the land of Oz. And when she first steps outside the house in the land of Oz and she opens up the door and everything is all these vibrant colors, that's what the difference was. And warm, too, instead of cold. Totally different environment, So I landed there in Florida. I was very sick. And went into this beautiful little trailer park. Now, why I say it was beautiful, the trailers weren't very big, They were only like maybe 40 feet long and about maybe 10 feet wide, the trailers. They were the old trailers of the day. Basically what they had was, they had a little kitchen, a small kitchen, one small bathroom. Generally had the bedroom in the back, and generally they had a second bedroom and a little small living room, I think, in the front, of the trailer. And that was it. And they'd park the trailers there at Pete's, and then everybody had a little veranda, like a little, like a little thing that would come out, like a little screened room, like that would come out over, and he had these pads parked there. And the pads were for your veranda. They were like a little concrete slab that was about maybe 10 feet wide and maybe 40 feet long. They would run across the front of the trailer. It'd be right in front of the trailer. So the trailer would be parked on the sand. And then what they would do is they'd put down these anchor bolts that were called hurricane anchors underneath the trailer. When they were going to install the trailer, they would screw these things into the ground. They were made of steel and they were about 4 feet long. They'd screw them into the ground, and then they would bolt the trailer down to these anchor bolts that were called hurricane anchors. I guess it was mandatorily required by Florida state law that each trailer be anchored down with hurricane anchors. And then the trailer would sit next to this concrete slab, and everybody in the park, they would all go out and buy these different plants they sold at the stores. One of the plants that they had in the park, loads of, was these croton plants. And these plants have great big wide leaves. And the leaves are all multicolored. So there's all different color crotons. There's yellow crotons and there's red crotons. And there's all these different colors. A very bright and vibrant plant. And they used to plant all these decorative plants, cactuses and everything else out in the front of their verandas. And so the park was very, very colorful, and all the trailers were different colors, And in the center of the park, they had this laundry, and I think they had a little store there and a laundromat and everything. Right in the center of the park, this building, it was where they kept the laundry machines and stuff. So my grandfather, he had I think his trailer was blue colored, powder blue colored. and it wasn't far from the laundromat. So we pulled in there, and we went in to stay with him. Of course, now there's my grandfather and grandmother living there, and both of my parents and me. So there's 5 of us in this little trailer, but I think it had 2 bedrooms. So my parents took 1 bedroom, and my grandfather and grandmother had the other bedroom. We stayed with them. While my dad, as soon as he landed, he wanted to try to go out and find himself a job. And he was an auto body repair mechanic, or my grandfather was into television repair. So my dad went out searching for a job. Meanwhile, I was really sick, and my mother was trying to take care of me. So the first few days I was there, probably for the first week, I was still pretty darn sick. And you know what she was doing? I was in that warm, hot sun. She'd sit me out in a chair, and I had a fever, and she would feed me these great big succulent oranges. She'd try to get me to eat as much of them as I could. Well, I'm going to tell you, after about the 3rd day there, eating these big succulent oranges, I started to have regular bowel movements, My bowels started to work again. And after about 4 or 5 days there, in this trailer park in the warm sun beating on me, and my fevers were lessening, and I was starting to feel a little bit of energy come back into my legs, and I was starting to get more of an appetite, And it was just like a heavenly place compared to where we'd come from. Where we'd come from seemed like we'd come out of hell and into heaven. This little trailer park with all these bright, vibrant colors and everything. It was just beautiful. So it wasn't long. Only about maybe a month passed, and my mother bought me these pair of sandals that had been made from tires. What they'd done is they had taken a rubber tire off of a car, and they'd stamped out the sole out of a rubber tire, an actual real rubber tire. And then they'd stamped out these holes on the sides of the sandal where they put leather in, And so mother bought me these sandals, and she bought me a pair of short pants that had all these pockets in them. Must have had pockets on the back, pockets on the front, pockets on the side, little pockets sewn in on top of the big pockets. And they were green pants, and they were made out of a real heavy green-colored fabric that was almost like canvas, but it wasn't canvas, but it was like cotton, but it was like really thick and heavy, like almost like blue jeans, the fabric on blue jeans, real heavy blue jeans. So she bought me these short pants, and short shirts to run around in. And I started to run around in the park, and have fun. There was a great big vacant woodlot right next to the park. And I remember it had banyan trees in there, and there was a few banana trees actually growing in there at the time, and it was very green. The colors of green, I can't tell you. When you're standing down there under those trees and you're looking up over the big web of trees above you, and the growth down there back then, it was almost like tropical or subtropical. And you're looking up through the canopy of leaves, and the bright sun was coming down from above, and the whole thing was just lit up like a neon green, these different colors of green and different hues of green. And the sounds, the crickets and the sounds of the insects in the woods and stuff, And so I was running around in that kind of environment, playing in the woods. And I was getting stronger and stronger. Every morning I'd go to school, I'd take the bus, and they had a nice little school there, and the kids were fairly good, to me. They weren't real bad to me there at that particular school. And I was getting stronger and stronger, and the environment that I was in was a kind of environment that's really conducive to happiness and stuff. I always have fond memories of that particular trailer park, with all the bright, vibrant colors. So not long went by, and my dad, he found a job, a place called Miami Lincoln Mercury, and he was making fantastic money, for back then. I mean, he was making about $300 a week. Now, that don't sound like much now, but back in those days, you could, he for like $400, he went out and bought a trailer. And it only cost him, I think, like $50 more to have the trailer installed on the lot. So he owned his own home then. So he bought this pink trailer. I know, pink, eh? But, you have to understand the time. Every trailer had a different color. There was orange ones, there was blue ones, there was green ones, there was purple ones, pink ones. So the pink one fit right in, in that trailer park because it was all different colors. It was very colorful. So my dad pulled it in not far, on a lot not far from my grandfather's lot, up closer to the wood lot where I used to play. And he got it all hooked up and installed, and we moved into our new trailer. It only cost him a little bit over 1 week's pay. You have to understand, in those days, $1 went a long way. Like, you could go to a little store down the road there, and you could buy enough groceries to fill your grocery cart for less than $20. Probably $15 or even $10. You could actually fill a grocery cart. With now, it would probably cost you $500, for that much food. So money went an awful long way, and $300 a week. I mean, my dad was like, it was like coming to heaven, because back in Nova Scotia, I think he was only making like $40 a week. And this go from $40 a week to $300 a week, he was paying off all of his debts in no time. So he's really enjoying himself there in Florida. My grandfather was making good money too, repairing TVs, but I don't think he was making quite as much as my father was. So I remember there in Hollywood, we used to eat out a lot. They had different restaurants we used to go to. They had a restaurant that was called Lum's, where they had, Lum's was a very interesting restaurant. My father, I think, used to like to go there because I think he could get a beer. Anyway, they used to sell these great big hot dogs, and they would serve them up in these round, like almost like a, the plates almost like had a webbing on them. They were almost like a, some sort of a bowl that was almost like a plastic, but it was like weaved plastic. So it wouldn't hold anything, except they used to line it with paper. And then they'd put the hot dog in there and put the French fries and everything inside the paper. So the paper would hold it. If they pulled the paper out, it would, the French fries and stuff would fall out through the weaving on the plastic. It was kind of like a plastic dish, and they used to serve these great big foot-long hot dogs and drinks, and at Lum's. So they had the Lum's. And then they had, I think it was called Hardee's or something like that. There was a restaurant where they had they used to have these mocha shakes. And the shakes were like made out of a chocolate that had like a coffee in it. And they were called a mocha. And then they would have these burgers that were like sliced beef. And then they'd put the beef and they'd barbecue it. This barbecued sliced beef sandwiches. And they used to have fries there, of course. And they used to keep everything under these red lights. And they had beans there. I always remember they had spicy beans, there at that particular place. And then there was Kentucky Fried Chicken. I used to love the Kentucky Fried Chicken. We used to go there a lot. And then they had the House of Pancakes, the IHOP. And the IHOP was very close. It was in only about 1 block away from the Peach Trailer Park. And you used to go in there in the morning, and they would, you could get these thing where you get 10 pancakes, the silver dollar pancakes. They're little small pancakes. They were about maybe 4 inches in diameter, and they had all different kinds of syrup. They had about 10 different kinds of syrup you could put on these pancakes at IHOP, Had lots of eggs and stuff there and everything, and we used to like to go there a lot. So we ate good, back in those days. Oh, and then they had a Burger King, too. And I'm going to tell you what, here's the thing about hamburgers and stuff, Like I went to Wendy's yesterday. And I used to go to Wendy's, and they have their junior hamburger, what they call their junior hamburger. 5 years ago, I used to go there and get the junior hamburger. And the junior hamburger, yesterday I went and I got a single, what's called a Wendy's single. So she slides it across the counter to me yesterday. And I was looking at it. And it was inside the package, inside the foil package. And I could see exactly the size of it, you know. It's the same size. The single now is the same size that the junior hamburger used to be on the dollar menu, right? And now it's like $5.49 for the single. So, I mean, what they've done is they've reduced the size of all their hamburgers down, you know? And I don't know what you have to do to get a really big normal size hamburger anymore. Now, we used to go back when we were in Hollywood and we'd go down to Burger King. We used to get what was called a Whopper. And the Whopper was a Whopper. I mean, the thing was like, if you saw it now, compared to the Whopper they got now, the Whopper they got now is about probably 4.5 inches in diameter. The Whoppers we used to get back then were like 10 inches in diameter. You know? And they had a lot of filling in them. I mean, it was a meal. You know? And this is what they've been doing all the way across the board. They've been reducing the size of everything. So back in those days, we used to go to Burger King and get a strawberry milkshake. And the thing had about a quart of ice cream in it. Strawberry ice cream, all mixed up, you know, into a milkshake. And so you're getting about a quart of ice cream, and your burger was probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter. And so when you ordered a Whopper back then, and you ordered a strawberry shake, you got full by the time you were done. I'm going to tell you, nowadays, a young guy goes into Burger King and he has to order about 3 Whoppers and about 4 strawberry shakes to get filled up the same way, you know. But back then, the price was like, I think it was less than $1 for a Whopper, and I think the strawberry shake was only like 39 cents or something like that, you know. So, and I mean, now you go in, it's like $5 each for the Whoppers and $3 each for the shakes, sort of thing. I mean, everything's changed. Of course, you know, the government's telling you now, they're saying, hey, you know what, there's no inflation. There's like 1% inflation, they say. Well, that would mean prices would have to double every 100 years. Prices aren't doubling every 100 years. Prices are doubling about every 4 or 5 years. Anyway, I'm starting to complain about that. Let's get back to the story. So we were living in this trailer park, and my dad got this great job at Miami Lincoln Mercury. He's making all kinds of money. He borrowed money from my uncle to pay for the car that he drove down to Florida in. So the car wasn't even paid for. I think he paid $10 on it as a down payment to my uncle. And I think my uncle said it was $100 he wanted for the car. So he paid $10 when he was in Nova Scotia, but that's all he had. He came down, he only had like $30. He arrived in Florida with like $30 from my mother and father. That's all they had. All the money they had in the world. And the car that he didn't own. Anyway, so my dad was earning like $300 a week. So my dad paid my uncle the $90 back just like that. You know, I mean, it was only 1/3 of his week's pay for 1 week. And he bought himself a new trailer for $400. $50, he got all the trailer installed, all the piping installed and everything else. And so I think the rent for the trailer park was only like $25 a month, you know? And he was making $300 a week. So we were living high on the hog. We were enjoying ourselves down there in Florida. And I'm going to tell you about Florida back in those days. Back in those days, Florida used to get a sea breeze. The night times were warm, but they weren't hot enough where it used to really bother you for sleeping. So you could sleep well at nighttime. And then during the day, it would start to get hot. And around 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning, it would start to get kind of hot and muggy, maybe up in the high 80s, 86, 87 degrees. And then a sea breeze would come in. Because what would happen is the warm air over the landmass, over over Central Florida or South Florida there, the warm air would start to rise because of the heat hitting it over the landmass. And as the warm air would rise, it would draw in cooler air from the ocean, and they call that a sea breeze. So they had a sea breeze every afternoon, and it was a balmy sea breeze, a probably 75 to 80 degree sea breeze, coming in off the ocean, and it blew away any bugs or anything. There wasn't any bugs. So you had this warm, balmy air. It was like a balmy breeze, that wasn't hot. It was just the perfect temperature. And so I always remember in the evenings, we would all meet together. My grandfather would be done work. My father would be done work. And then we'd always meet someplace to have supper, or late evening dinner, and my grandmother would be there and my mother and everything. And the women would want to go out shopping after. And so we'd always go to someplace like Lum's or Burger King or someplace like that, and have a nice meal. And then my mother and my grandmother had all kinds of shopping money. My grandfather and my father would give them some money. My grandfather would give my grandmother like $10. And he'd always say the same thing: don't spend it all in one place. But okay, now that doesn't sound like he's giving her much money, $10 now. But I'm going to tell you, back then, that had the buying power of 100 now. So it'd be like him giving her $100 every evening to spend on whatever she wanted, So my grandmother and my mother used to go into these stores and buy jewelry, and they had a great time, buy clothes, and they would be shopping. And my grandfather and my father would be going shopping too, And they had these different stores, like I think one of them was called J.M. Fields, these different, and then everybody would go back home, and they'd have dessert when they get back home. After they got back home, they'd be starting to get a little bit hungry again, and then everybody would go to bed, later in the evening to get up for the next day's activities. And it was a very tranquil lifestyle. I always have fond memories of Pete's Trailer Park. Anyway, I figured I'd tell you the story about Pete's Trailer Park this morning. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next show. Bye-bye, guys.